Hi everyone, my name is Christine here with Oxygen Farm Quilts, and I would like to thank you for joining me today. Today I am working with my Halloween fabric scrappy stash. I have a bin that I keep my holiday fabrics in, one for Halloween, one for Christmas, things like that. And so this is what I have left from my Halloween fabrics. A few years ago, I had made some different pumpkins, and I love to use graph paper to sketch out some pumpkins. So I did some with squares, and I did some with just like strips of fabric. And so if you are familiar with my sparkling leaves quilts, where I made a bunch of maple leaf blocks out of scrap fall fabrics. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do that with these Halloween fabrics and do it with pumpkins. The color I'm going to use for my background is this, it's a really deep purple and it has stars in it. I wanted something that was completely different. I just want to use what I have on hand. I think there's about 2 yards here. Besides my Halloween fabrics, I have pulled some solids and some with a little bit of print that aren't necessarily Halloween, but it definitely works with it. So come along with me and let's see what we can come up with. So here we go. Since everything has been stored in bins, I want to make sure to get all the pieces that are sewn together just taken apart, and then give everything a good iron before I start working with it. When I have so many scraps like this, I never know where to start, because it's like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do this. So sometimes I have to be like, just pick one and go with it. I drew up a couple different pumpkin shapes, basically just trying to make them a rectangle, and then trying to figure like, okay, I want to use this one and I like some of this fabric with it, and then maybe this one. The problem I'm running into is that this one here is just a little bit more than 3.5 inches. So if I want to do one of these layouts, I wouldn't have enough out of this strip. So that's where I need to bring in perhaps another fabric. I'm just gonna kind of wing it as I go, but the main point I wanted to make was, instead of looking at everything, pick one of your scrap pieces and be like, okay, what can I create with this piece and have fabrics that complement it. The next one I feel like working on are these little strips. I had actually bought some stash from a gal that is no longer with us. Her family was selling a bunch of her fabric, and so a lot of these Halloween fabrics were in that stash. I thought I'd pair it with this. It's a white with it kind of looks like a peachy polka dot, but when it's against the orange, it looks orange. This fabric is pretty thin. So when I have fabrics that are thin like that, I like to, when you cut it, when it's on the fold here, I leave it that way. I'm going to go along and just sew this right to it, and I will leave it doubled up. That way it's just thicker and a lot more durable. So here's that last one. Okay, I've used up all of my, what I would consider Halloween fabric. So if it had a print on it for Halloween, all I have left are these, which can be used for other projects. They aren't necessarily Halloween. So my next step after having all of my blocks done is I want to add the background to the corners to round off each pumpkin. I'm not using a specific square for doing that. So I have cut a 3-inch strip out of my background. I have a 2.5 inch, and I think this is a 2-inch. And so what I'm going to do, let me cut another 3-inch here, is I'm going to take my largest block, which is this one. I will have all of the numbers of how many blocks I have, as well as some other information down in the description box below the video. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to put right sides down a square on each corner. And then I am going to sew corner to corner here and then cut that off and then flip that down. That's going to help me round off for each one. So as I place my square right sides together, I want to sew from this corner to this corner. When I sew corner to corner, I use the painter's tape that I have on my machine. The edge of the green is lined up with my 1/4 inch foot, and the edge of the blue is lined up with my needle. So I don't need to draw a line or fold to make a line. I start off up at this corner and then I line this up back here. Now a little tip, when you are sewing something to basically snowball a corner, I want to make sure that after I sew it and I fold this over, the top part covers this entire part over here. So a little tip for doing that is normally when you sew corner to corner, you go exactly at that point and you go over to exactly on that point. When it comes to snowballing, I prefer to go that way just a smidge so that it allows me that extra little bit, you could say, just to make sure that when I fold it over, it's going to cover it the whole way. When I first start sewing, I like to start off with my needle in a little bit on the fabric so that it hits the fabric first. I'll take a few stitches and then I'll take a few stitches backwards to lock that in. Now as I get chain piecing, I won't need to do that every time. And so after I know I'm secured, I am double checking this side down here. So I want to make sure that this point is lined up with where my needle is, which is the edge of the blue. And then I am just scooching it over just a little tiny bit. That way my stitches will be that way just a little bit more. So normally I would just keep chain sewing and getting all my corners on, but I want to show you. So as I put this over, it is covering that entire corner completely. So once I have all of my corners done, what I will do is I'll double check to make sure that it is covering completely. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut this off. I'm just going to use my scissors and cut this corner off. So after this corner is cut off, and I will have 4 of these, I will, if it's a larger triangle, I will keep this for my scrap basket, my crumb basket. But this part, since this is the background, this is a large size triangle, so I will use it on another one of my larger blocks. I will just kind of wing it, place it on there, make sure it's covering that corner, and then repurpose the other half of these triangles. I'm starting large when I'm doing my corners, and then I will work smaller. It's the same way I did with my blocks. I started off with large squares, and then whatever pieces were remaining turned into smaller squares. When using these trimmings of the triangles, when I go to put it on another one, since I won't have the full square there, I'm just kind of eyeing it and making sure that once I have my seam allowance, that it's going to fold over and cover that corner. I am not worried about it being perfect. I'm not worried about it being perfectly straight. I just want to kind of cover that corner, because if you look at a pumpkin in a pumpkin patch, they're all kind of wonky. So I'm kind of going for that look, kind of quirky, kind of cartoonish. This fabric is really kind of cartoonish. So I don't know, I kind of like that. Plus I don't have to stress out about it. It's just fun sewing. So once I have that sewn on, before I would cut this off, is I will take this and fold this over and make sure that it's covering. Okay, just double checking, making sure they're all covered. And then I like to just whip through, cut all these off. You don't have to cut these off if you don't want to. And then what I will do is I will flip it over. Normally I would go through and iron these. Then I will come through and just square off this corner. These bins here are where I keep specific sizes of my scraps. So there are strips and squares in here, and they are for the different sizes. So I have 1.5, 2 inch, 2.5, 3, I think these are 4, 5, 6, and then I have 8 and 10. So when I finish a project and I have scraps, I like to just cut them up big and then go smaller, 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 and then put them in these bins. So it works great. So I came to one of these, and so I have pulled some different browns for my pumpkin stems that I'll use. Okay, now it's time to put the stems on these pumpkins. So I pulled some brown from my stash. This is from my 3-inch bucket, so I could do a brown stem like that. But I also had some of this green in my stash. I think since this witch has green and the pumpkins have the green, I'm going to do green as a stem. So I'm going to straighten out my edge here. And then I'm going to make it a little, these are 3-inch squares that I used on here. So I'm going to go, I'll go a little bit smaller than 3 inches. I'm really not worried about it. So it's going to go like that. And then I have my background fabric, and I've cut it into 3 inches. So I'm going to sew it onto here. So now I have my little pumpkin, and I'm just gonna kind of center it, but I'm not too worried. If it goes kind of crooked, that's okay. So I'm just lining that up there in the middle. I'll just go ahead and trim off these sides. There's one little pumpkin with a stem. Something else I want to try is, so say for a plain square like that, I had a bunch of little square pieces remaining from trimming. And so I'm going to go ahead and do one on the corner up here to kind of give it a different look, just to kind of give it a little something different. Again, just like before, I'm going to sew corner to corner, and I'm going to scooch that way just a little bit. Make sure it covers. And it does. I'll probably save this little piece. Okay, so I can put it that way or that way. I kind of like it that way. And then these strips are the same size as my square, so just like before, I'll sew these on here and then attach it. I'm doing a little more of, I had some of this solid fabric left over, so I just cut them into rectangles, and I'm making small little pumpkins to use for fillers, and I'm just trimming them up. And then I also went through, because I had little scraps of the triangle cutoffs in my background. So some of them, like I did before, I did it to where I did it, you know, exactly just on the corner. But on these, you'll notice it's a little bit more at an angle. So it kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be just the corner. It can kind of go down the side, however you want to put that on there. Let me square this up so I can show you what I'm talking about here. And something to think about is that when you have a piece like this, it could be placed. Let's see, let me grab. Let's just do this one right here. So here are a couple choices that can be done when it comes to your pumpkin and your stems. So here is just a regular medium pumpkin. So I can put the stem on like this, or I could turn it like this. Or I could do this with my pumpkin. I can turn my pumpkin like this and have it be one of those tall pumpkins like that. Or I could turn it like that. So you can see you can really play around with your stems, with how you want to lay out your pumpkin. So I know I definitely want to do some that are up and down. Like I might do this one because it says boo here. So I think that'd be really cool to have that read like that in the quilt. So I don't know if I'll do, you know, I could do a ginormous stem if I wanted, or I could just, you know, cut it down a little bit and still have a very tall stem and a little squatty pumpkin. It's going to be fun just playing around and throwing these on there, trying some different shapes and having fun with it. I wanted to stop the fast video for a moment and let you into my head. Last night I finished using up all my scraps making these pumpkins, and I gotta tell you, when I went to bed last night, I was not feeling too jazzed about this quilt. I was just like, God, is this gonna turn out okay? Is this really worth my time to do this? But I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna stick it out and keep going with the thought that I had in my head. Maybe it still won't turn out, you know, as good as maybe I would have hoped, but it's still going to be cute. It's still going to give all of this fabric purpose. Someone hopefully will love it, and that's okay, and that's good enough for me. I'm still putting a lot of work into it. I'm going to do my best that I can on it, but I wanted to let you know that as I'm putting the stems on these pumpkins, they're starting to come to life for me. I've made pumpkins before for wall hangings and pillows and stuff like that. The scrappy kind of, you know, like what this is, the pixelated kind, you know. So I had that vision for doing in a quilt, and so I'm hoping it's gonna turn out okay. But I guess my main point is sometimes as you're working on a quilt, for me, I find it's best to keep going. I woke up today, I didn't really want to work on it. I was like, maybe I should just put it away until next year for Halloween. But then I thought, no, you know what? I have the time. I'm just going to go ahead and push through and keep going at it. And I'm so glad that I did. I got quite a bit done today. Of course, we can never get done as much as we would like. Just wanted to give you a little insight on kind of where my mind was. Just wondering, like, do you guys get that way? Sometimes, you know, at the end of the day, you're just like, I don't know, you know, and do you put it away? Does it become what they call a UFO? And sometimes I suppose it is best just to wait until your heart's in it, but then will your heart ever be in it? That was just a thought I'd like to share with you guys, because y'all are so sweet and I really appreciate it. And plus, look how adorable these little pumpkins are. Like, they're so cute. Okay, so I have all of my pumpkins made. They are all different sizes. I've tried to categorize them by size and direction that they are, but I'm not too worried about what size they are at this moment. So I have a total of 35 pumpkins that I made. What I've done is I have taken my largest block, my largest pumpkin, and I only have one that is this size. It measures at this time 18 inches by about 13 3/4. I want to make this a solid number. I don't want to have to try to remember 13 3/4. My ultimate goal is to take my other blocks and either do a single like this and make it the same size as this large one. And then with the smaller ones, I'll combine them with other blocks and then get them to that size. And I'll show you that here in a minute. So what I've decided is I am going to make this a whole number. So I'm keeping the 18 inches wide, and then I'm going to add some fabric to the bottom to get this at 15 inches so that all of my blocks will end up 18 inches by 15 inches. I have taken my painter's tape and put 18 inches over here so I don't have to try to remember. It'll just be on my ruler. I'll mark it down over here. Now, as far as my backing fabric, after adding my corners and the top pieces, I have about 47 inches by width of fabric left. So I have just a little over a yard. I would love to be able to have enough to use it for a border and my binding, but I don't know if I will. My main goal right now is to just make all of my blocks the same size. The other thing that I am thinking about is my layout. So, and I am hoping that I am not cutting my head off. So I'm going to sit down, because so many times after I do a recording, because I'm just a one-woman film crew here, after I do a recording, I watch it and I've already cut my block, so I can't go and do it again, and then have my head is cut off. So I'm going to sit down and see if this helps. When it comes to layout, I want to make sure that I have a number divisible by what I can lay my blocks on. What I mean by that is I want to make sure that I don't have any of these blocks remaining. Now, if you're working on a project and you do have one remaining, you could certainly turn it into a little wall hanging or a pillow or something, but I just want to be able to put all of this into this quilt. So when I am thinking about how many blocks I'm going to make, I want to have it to where, say, I can make it 20 blocks. That would be 4 across by 5 down. But here's a little something different that I want you to think about. If you are making a block that is not a square block, it's a rectangle block. If I do 4 across by 5 down, most likely that's going to turn out to be a square quilt instead of more of a rectangle quilt because of the height difference. I may want my number to come out as 4 across by 6 down or even 7 down because I am dealing with a rectangle. And then I want to show you one more thing. When I do mark on my ruler with the painter's tape, if you haven't used painter's tape before, it does not leave any sticky residue when you take it off. And I don't put it right on the line that I am marking. I put it right underneath there just as an indicator like, okay, that's the size I'm cutting. These are my next larger sizes. I'm not going to add small pumpkins to these. I'm just going to add fabric just to make these the same size as my largest block. When I was deciding on this block, the size to make it, I remembered I had made some of my pumpkins super tall. So if you do that, make sure you take that into consideration to make sure that this one little pumpkin isn't going to be taller than what you're going to make this block at. Let's continue on. I'm hoping my head ain't cut off. If you are familiar with me and my channel, you'll hear me talk about how I know I have a hefty seam allowance. I've added a strip to the bottom and I needed to add about 1 3/4 inch strip. Since I know I have a hefty seam allowance, I made mine about just a little bit more than 2 inches. If you know that you have a hefty seam allowance or if you have a scant seam allowance, go ahead and adjust whatever size you cut your strips for that. It's okay. For me, I would rather cut off these little shavings, even though I know I'm kind of cutting it close on my background fabric. I would still rather have all of them be the same size than have them be kind of, iffy. I have 6 of my single large pumpkins. Since I'm limited on my background fabric, I'm going to go ahead and set up. I have a design curtain in my workshop down here. It's just a curtain rod up there. I just have some fleece and I put a pocket on it. I do have a center support here that I can lift up and move over for doing some larger layouts here. So what I'm going to do is start to put some of the large blocks up. When I talked about being limited on my background fabric, I highly suggest to not limit yourself because I feel like it's taken away some of my freedom of how I can put this block together. I have to really keep in mind how many blocks I'm going to get out of it. So I just feel like I'm limited. Try not to limit yourself on that if you can help it. I went through and also did some math with the width and height of my block. I figured out what the measurement would be if I did, here is an example. If I do 3 across by 5 down, it should finish at 53 by 73. And then I did 4 across by 6 down, 4 by 5. I did a whole bunch of different ones to see how many different blocks I could get. So if I did the 3 across by 5 down, I would need 15 blocks. Hi everyone, I wanted to give you an update on my pumpkin quilt. As you can see, I had to arrange it a little bit differently because I am running pretty low on my background fabric. I've just condensed my smaller pumpkins more into one block. If I had more of my background fabric, I would have been able to scatter these out more and make a bigger quilt, but it's fine. It's still going to be 3 across by 4 down, and I believe my numbers, it'll be about 53 by 58, but I will be sure to have all the details down in the description box below this video. I have 3 more spots that I have to fill in, and I have all these little pumpkins left. So I'm going to try to fit as many as I can into my 3 remaining blocks. If I have a couple left over, I'm totally cool with that. I'll put it back with my Halloween and fall fabrics, and you know, maybe I'll be able to give it purpose next year. Something that I found to be pretty helpful is having this cutting mat here. So not only for being able to, you know, trim up my pumpkins, but also to use the numbers on my mat as a footprint for my final block dimensions. I could be like, okay, this goes to 18 by 15, so I can kind of play around with these and decide where I want to put them, how many I'd be able to fit in there, you know, and so that works really well if you do have an extra cutting mat. If not, if you are trimming with like a big ruler, whatever size your final block is, you can also just use this. You can lay your pumpkins on top of your ruler, or maybe even take some painter's tape, whatever the dimension is for your block, and tape it to the table that you're working next to, so that that could be your footprint for helping gauge your blocks. I'm going to get this finished up, and oh, I wanted to tell you too that I hope that this was inspirational for you to allow yourself to just have fun and just sew whatever you wanted to make with some pumpkins with your fall or Halloween fabrics. Not have to worry about everything being perfectly straight, because you know, pumpkins can be wonky. It was a lot of fun just sitting and sewing. I think the biggest obstacle I had was I didn't have enough background fabric. So if I have a tip for you, make sure you have a lot of background fabric. So I'm going to finish this up and then we'll see how it turns out. This is the remaining amount of fabric that I have, and I want to use it as a border on my quilt. I won't be able to make it very wide, but at least I'll be able to use this up. I found this stripe that has a kind of purpley tone to it, so I'm going to use that for my binding. This is how I'm going to figure how many strips and what size strips do I need to cut to be able to use this up and not fall short. So what I like to do is I take what my quilt top measurement is going to be. So in this case, it is about 53 inches by 58.5 inches. I am going to round both of those numbers up to 60, just to give myself some wiggle room. So if you take 60 times 4, because I need it for all 4 sides, that gives me 240 inches all the way around my quilt top. And then my width of fabric strip, I think it might be like 42. I like to round down on that, and so I am making it 40 inches. So I'm going to take 240 inches and divide that by 40. That gives me 6. That means I need to cut 6 strips out of this fabric to go around my border. Okay, so now to figure out what size those 6 strips are going to be is I will take the distance across here. So this is 14 inches. So I'm going to take 14 inches because that's how much I have remaining. I'm going to take 14 and I'm going to divide that by 6 because I need 6 strips. And so that gives me 2.33333. So I'm going to go ahead and round down on that and go down to 2.25, which would be 2 1/4 inch strips. So I should be able to get 6 2 1/4 inch strips out of this fabric. I do have a little bit here, so if I do fall a little bit short, then this can be like my bonus wiggle room fabric. Whew. Phew. I had enough. Yay. Is that gonna hold me?